I had this picture that I was going to miserably live with her illness and live with a lot of fear and trepidation. And then she would die, and then I would collapse, and then I'd kind of survive, and then I'd pick up the pieces and limp forward. And that is not at all what the experience was like.
Cheryl Espinosa-Jones is a counselor and the host of the program Good Grief on the VoiceAmerica network. She works with individuals and couples in grief or facing transitions in their lives and relationships. She has spent a lifetime exploring human loss, revelation, and transformation. When she was training to practice psychotherapy, her first wife lived and died of cancer. That experience, more than any other, taught her that human beings are capable of astonishing epiphanies and inspiring grace. In this episode, Cheryl talks about her own experiences with dealing with death, how anticipatory grieving helped her deal with her wife's death, and how her experiences have helped her deal with fear. She also talks about how facing death doesn't have to be somber. Please support the show by liking and sharing this episode on social media, and to make sure that you don't miss out on any future episodes, please sign up for our newsletter at deathhangout.com. Now, get ready for this episode, Facing the Hard Stuff.
The first love of my life, I've had two, was diagnosed with a very virulent form of cancer. It's called multiple myeloma. At that time, it was killing people within 6 months or a year. Then she didn't die. She ended up living 10 years with that illness. The experience of living with her illness and then living through her death and through my own grief really transformed me. I had this picture that I was going to miserably live with her illness and live with a lot of fear and trepidation. And then she would die, and then I would collapse, and then I'd kind of survive, and then I'd pick up the pieces and limp forward. And that is not at all what the experience was like. There were a couple of years of terror. Abject terror and a swirling eddy of emotion, a lot of struggle, a lot of trying to face up to, having been kind of abandonment phobic and then being committed to someone who was expected to die quickly was very difficult. I never want to minimize the difficulty of that, but some years into it, something broke open. Life became a lot more livable. I remember once, right before she died, it was probably 3 weeks or so before she died, and a friend who was a masseuse came to offer me a massage. And we went in a quiet room, and she massaged me, and she did a very nice 1 hour. Oh, it was great. And afterwards she said, "I thought you'd be so tense. You're the most relaxed person I've ever massaged." Because I was just entirely open. There was nothing to guard against. I think the bottom line is that you cannot be prepared for death, but you can prepare. I couldn't be prepared for her to die, but I had been preparing for 10 years. There was a sense in which I was ready. And then, of course, I'll say this because it's your show. Her death for me was euphoric. And that's a part of the whole experience I hesitate to share sometimes because people look at me crazy. It was very transcendent experience. Okay. I did not feel the absence of her for at least 6 weeks. I just felt surrounded by her. Then grief has to happen. I definitely did grief, but it wasn't the kind of ripping, tearing time for me that I expected. It was more like, whatever comes, I welcome it. What that took is making myself the subject of my own heart. I had to say, whatever comes, I welcome it. It's something I'm going through, and that matters to me. Who knows which part of the whole thing changed me. It all changed me. It can't be differentiated. I had kids. How they went through it was remarkable to me. Certainly, they have some fears, but less than their contemporaries, actually. Having faced death early, I feel they're not avoiding it in the way, they're the one that calls when someone has a loss. It's just a thing they do. It's not like they have to be working up to it or anything. They just, oh, that's terrible. I'm going to get in touch. There's a comfort they have that I think comes from actual experience, from being with a dead body of someone that they loved.
And something that I, retain from your story is, even in this difficult experience, you were planning how it will be. So you were planning that this is what I will experience, then I will get that, and I will get that. And then at the end, nothing of what you planned really happened. You get this euphoric, you mentioned experience, and then you transform.
I have to put in there, though, that the what you're calling planning, what I might call anticipatory grieving, was part of the preparation. I do not believe I would have had the same experience if I hadn't faced off with my fears.
That was the being prepared. That it's almost like you can prepare, but you can't be prepared because until you've had it, you don't know how to prepare for it. What were some of the things you did in that preparation?
So one of the main things that we did together is that we spent a lot of time with Stephen and Andrea Levine. Stephen was a poet and also very active in the death movement, quote unquote. His wife, Andrea, is maybe the biggest hearted person I've ever known. She just has a heart wider than the world. So we would go to their workshops and we got to know them pretty well. I would sum up everything they do very poetically, but still, everything they do is about accepting what's happening. If you're meditating, their particular way of guiding meditation would be about accepting what's going on in you. Recognizing what's happening and saying okay to it, noticing it. That just had a really profound impact on the way that I faced all difficult things. There's much less resistance in me than there used to be. I'm not trying to get rid of anything. I mean, I'm human. Sometimes I don't want something to be happening, but I recognize I can't get rid of it. Working with them had a very, very big impact on the way I went through the whole thing. I think that who Joanne was, my first wife, had a huge impact because her perspective was that we were the unit that was being supported. It wasn't me supporting her. There was one point where a social worker came to assess us, I guess, for hospice. And she said, do either of you have a spiritual teacher? Joanne turned to me and said, I'll be yours if you'll be mine. I think there was the fact that she saw us as going through this together helped, because then I wasn't sort of over to the side. We were supporting each other. I think that's really crucial. The community we had. I know from working with cancer, we had a very remarkable community, and they supported steadily for a very long time. And in the process, they started facing up to things, and we all were together in it. That had a big impact. Therapy, help. I mean, we did everything we could do because it was a big experience. Our youngest child, we actually became guardians to while she was sick. That's not that uncommon a situation, that people who are facing death to the point of kind of living your life more fully. What is it that's really important in your life? For Joanne, it was being a parent. She didn't want to leave this life without that experience. I was more resistant because that seemed like a lot, a teenager, a baby, and a dying person, a dying part. And very blessed that I did. Complicated life, but brought the community much more. We needed a lot of help. So that increased the amount of community.
You talked about Stephen Levine, this deaf movement. You have this radio show. How have you seen this? I don't know how, if I can call this a deaf movement, but how do you see this talk about death evolving?
It just seems as if there's a whole lot more death talk. which is a big relief to me.
Yeah.
But I can't be sure it isn't that I'm more exposed. I get people reaching out to me who have written a book, or in this case with the two of you, my friend meeting you and then sending you my way. So I'm blessed to be aware
Mm.
of how much death conversation there is. But it also seems to me like it certainly feels as if it's different than when, I was 35.
What's different for you? What makes it different for you?
There's more talk in the general public, and there seems like there's more interest. Not that there aren't a lot of death deniers and, that, and people who are not too comfortable about the whole thing, but when people experience a loss, they're not necessarily going to be silent about it.
Right.
They're maybe going to start a blog. They're maybe going to tell all their friends on Facebook how they're feeling about it today, maybe going to join a group. I'm actually interviewing the founder of the dinner party, where you just get a bunch of people together who've all had a loss and have dinner and talk. There are a lot of those things happening. One of your guests, Ned Buzzkirk,
Right.
You're Going to Die, trying to integrate the arts. He's wonderful. He's near me, and I've had him. It's not hard to find, even when you're not exactly looking. And then if you're looking, there's a lot of people engaged in what we are. When I started the show, one of my friends said, "Aren't you going to have a hard time getting guests?" And I hadn't even, that had not occurred to me. And then I thought, "Ooh, am I?" But that has not been a problem.
Right.
There really are a lot of people talking about loss, grief, these experiences. That's heartening to me, because I think that does connect with a broader, more open, compassionate culture when we can face the hard stuff.
The more people see this happening, the more things are popping up, the more it just gets, in some ways, maybe makes it a little bit safer for those people who maybe aren't in full death denial, but those who are they could go either way. So I think it's good to see. And I think there's a lot of people doing a lot of good work in a really, you use the word compassion, that comes across. Someone like Ned, for example. I mean, I think the guy's spilling over with compassion and authenticity. It just makes it very safe for people to talk about, which is wonderful.
And he has a sort of irrepressible spirit. That's what I've noticed. So that is a little bit contagious. I went to one of his events once, and I was like the oldest person there. Some people were there on dates, Wow, this is so... Let's go to You're Going to Die. You want to go Friday?
First date. Yeah.
First date, let's go there.
Let's get things in perspective right from the beginning. Right Let's not row about stuff that doesn't matter, because we're going to die anyway.
Exactly. So that's an example of that facing death is not actually somber.
Yeah.
It's just facing death. And it's real scary at moments, for sure. But then it's something else. Now I'm getting to an older age, and there are some different ways that I'm facing my own death than I did in my 40s when she died.
In terms of how those differences, how have they come about?
Well, I think there's something different about facing death when you feel your body changing. She faced death as her body deteriorated in a different way than I did being with her. There's also a lot of aging denial. It makes my own physical end more real to me, when I thought it was pretty real to me before. My own parents dying, which happened in 2009 and 2014, changed my perspective on the world, made my own death closer. Even though I'm immersed in contemplations of death, talking about it, it's just a slightly different angle on it.
I love this openness that you have, and we talked about this on your show, about this. Every guest that we had talking about death, they're all open, compassionate, kind, nice. So I don't know, there's something about that.
The people that I interview have a mission. They have a calling. If you choose to organize your life around a loss experience, you write a book or you change your work or whatever it is, there's a calling in it. There's wanting people to have access to whatever it is that you worked hard to get.
And I get that, I get this thing about these people, this transformation that you just mentioned at the beginning. On your show, we talked about also what happens in your country as well, in the US. With it's our show, so we can say, who he is. We can get political if you want, But, for me, there's the opposite. There's the lack of compassion. There's somebody who is elected, and it doesn't take a genius to see that is very, very egocentric. It's all about ego. It's all about me, the self. I'm just wondering, the world seems to lack this compassion today, and we need somehow to accept this. Is it through death? I guess this is the question. Is it through death that we'll get to there?
I think that denying death is kind of the big guns.
Yeah.
But if you're busy trying to ward off the negative, whatever it is, that can result in a kind of frozen, shut down way of living. I also think it kind of tends towards getting more, being more important than getting better. There's a lot of greed in what's going on. It's not just about hateful behavior towards certain groups. There's a greed underneath that, I think, that has to do with, I'm not going to have enough. Some people really don't have enough. I think that's a contributor to why people were drawn to Trump, because he was saying, somebody's trying to take something away from you and you should have it. They shouldn't have it. Whereas if you're coming from empathy, you're saying, if we don't all have it, we have nothing. It's just a really, really different worldview. Although I'm not enjoying living this experience of the dichotomy on either end. I don't think, hate at either end is that helpful, honestly.
Great.
But I'm not enjoying it, but I'm sort of glad it's out in the open in a strange way, because that's something we have to face too, that we have parts of us that are hateful, and we have parts of us that don't want the other person, that we want to get rid of the other person. And I think we all have that inside of us as humans.
Right.
So how do we start seeing ourselves more wholly that way?
With our shadows, basically. It reminds me of Carl Jung, the shadows that we're having.
Exactly.
It's this powerful, very powerful concept. And actually this show that we're having on the Deaf and Gut, it's almost like this, is to be able to accept this shadow that we're having, that we all have. And somehow that will trigger this compassion that you just mentioned.
Yes, and I think that human brains have, for survival reasons, the capacity to hate, to go towards the us and them in a really hair trigger way. It's less natural for us to open up and accept that the other person doesn't agree, or I think that's evolutionary. I'm hoping that it's getting progressive. What did Martin Luther King say? That the long arc of freedom bends towards history bends towards justice, or something like that. I hope that's true, but I also know that each individual human has to evolve. It's not like every human on the planet is going to, at the very same time, find that quality. I don't personally think that some moment is going to come where it's all fixed. It's more about how we're each responding to it and the capacity for any given human to change.
It's going to take work as well. For each individual, it takes work to be able to look at the reality, accept the bits that are real, and then look to address those in as you said earlier, in a holistic way. So it takes everything in. So the good, the bad. This is where we're at.
I saw this video the other day. I wish I'd written down his name. It was a little interview with an African-American man who's taken it as his mission to befriend Ku Klux Klan members. He doesn't talk about black-white politics. He doesn't talk about any of that. He just somehow identifies a particular member and then just befriends them. They talk about the weather and where they like to shop and somehow he gets people to do that. First of all, that's rather miraculous. But then a pretty substantial percentage of the people that he befriends end up, not because he ever said anything about it, but they end up quitting the clan.
Okay.
Because they can't in the end put together this loving person with what they've been taught to believe. It can't fit together. And I love that. If you can find a doorway into another person's reality, your perspective on them might change. You could just think, okay, they're an exception. Everybody else is messed up. But a pretty substantial amount of the time, it changes your feeling about the thing.
It creates a cognitive dissonance in there, so it challenges the belief. We're talking about this at the moment, the dichotomy. It comes back to Sheldon Solomon, who we had on the show. When the death denial gets stronger, if you like, fear, it's what people become fearful. They cling to their beliefs more. They cling more to people that are the same as them. So it sort of makes sense in a way that if people are scared of, and if we take death as in the actual event of dying, but also there's all these little deaths along the way when things change, someone passes or something comes to the end of an era, or there's something which has been a big part of your life in some way is no longer the same. It's gone. So there's that same fear that comes up, and people
absolutely.
Their beliefs are stronger. They're less open to hearing the other side. So I think there's a lot of that going on at the moment as well.
I think it goes one way or the other. That's also what we're talking about in terms of, for instance, the transformation in me was, for whatever reason, the terrible thing and the terrible loss, for whatever reason, I wanted to make meaning of that. I wanted to make something from it. And if I could bottle that, the therapy I do with clients would be a lot faster, right?
I think that's what you said earlier. You said the big thing for you is the acceptance piece. Right. It was the work you did on the acceptance. So you're absolutely right. If there's any kind of death denial there, it's going to close you up and push you away. Yeah. If there's an acceptance or an openness there, there's a chance to move in the other direction.
Let's take something like a town where almost everybody has worked in the coal mines for generations. That's the only life that's known in that place.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of an extreme example to make the point. And then the coal mine shuts down. What do you want? You want the coal mine to open. There's not. Yeah, you may know coal is not the cleanest fuel and Who cares?
We don't.
Who cares? I just want that back, What do I do now?
It's a loss of identity.
What do I actually do? How do I make a living? And not to mention, I lost my house in 2008 and, I'm working 3 jobs to try. I think people are suffering.
So is it like the fear of this unknown? The unknown, everything is changing. We talk about this cycling. Things are not solid in the ground. We all know that. You mentioned something about this guy befriending guy from the clan. If we can make a parallel, do we have to befriend death somehow in order to be open? Do we need to go as far as that?
I've seen some pretty open people who then have a diagnosis or something, like they're living their lives, they're pretty open, and then everything shuts down. I do think it's kind of the biggest, like if you face that, facing other things is easier. If you don't face that, eventually it's going to catch up to you. For me, anyway, really helpful. To face up to it. I had a client recently in my group, in my women's cancer support group, who died, and up to the very moment she died, she was looking for the next treatment. Well, to me, that probably means she didn't have certain types of conversations with people. I'm not putting down that way of doing it. That's just another way to do it. But for me, it was sad. I felt something had been missed.
In that preparing, and it's just that connectedness around, in that preparing yourself, that acceptance, having those conversations, it actually helps prepare everyone else as well. That's the thing. It affects it's that whole community. All of the people are going to be impacted around it. The more open it is, when you work on your own journey, you can't help but impact the others and get them ready for it too.
I personally do not want to die someday with the sense that I failed. And to me, death denial leads in that direction. It shouldn't be happening. Well, okay, who failed? It's got to be the person dying. There's just not really a way around that. And I don't want to die that way. I would like to die with the sense that it's another experience I'm having. I just got a contract for a book I wrote, and it's a novel, which is weird in and of itself. Never thought I'd write fiction. And I was sure that this particular publisher wouldn't publish it because they like happy endings. And it doesn't have a happy ending in some terms, right? And when she called to talk to me about it, she said, well, it's a very heavy subject and it's very important. I'm like, okay, that lines up with my thinking, right? It's a matter of facing up to things.
Yeah.
And having normal human events not be a disaster. They're just things that happen that we have big feelings about. It's not catastrophic, actually. It is in the moment, feels catastrophic, but it's just life.
You mentioned earlier about the lack of resistance. There's so much of the pain that we cause ourselves is through the resistance to what is. It's just by not accepting what's in front of us, and that resistance causes that pain to last because it is what it is. That's not going to change. So at some point we've got to accept it. But the longer we refuse to, the harder it is to get through that.
Sometimes I'll do pain meditation with clients I have that are in a lot of pain, and the pain meditation does not change the physical cause of the pain, but it changes all the layers around it. So this is a physical example of what you're talking about. And people at the end of that will say, oh, I'm not in pain. Now, I know I have not gotten rid of the physical thing.
Yeah.
But we've walked through the resistance. And it's just, I can remember when I was grieving, like crying all day, but it was fine with me. I didn't feel bad about it. It's just what was happening at the moment. Oh, yeah, people cry when their loved one died. It was sort of very matter of fact. And then I wouldn't cry. And then I'd, listen to music and love it. And then I'd sing a song. And, it was very fluid. And I've lost a little bit of that, but I remember it so clearly. I know it's possible. I can never unlive it.
We hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Again, please support the show by signing up at deathhangout.com or clicking on the subscribe button on your screen.